Late
Hey
afternoon in
there. You look
Flagstaff,
like you could use
Arizona,
this.
and the
For
sun was
me?
dying
Yeah.
slow the
Go
way it
on, eat up.
always did in the high desert, not falling so much as bleeding, pouring its last warmth across the sandstone cliffs and the pine ridges to the north, turning the whole sky into a bruise of copper and violet that no photograph could ever truly hold. Red Mesa Diner sat on the edge of town like a forgotten postcard, a low cinder block building with a flat roof and a neon sign that buzzed and flickered the way it had since 1974. The parking lot was cracked asphalt patched with weeds. A metal bench outside leaned against the wall beneath a faded Coca-Cola sign, and the wind had scoured the paint on the window frames until they were the color of old bone. Inside, the ceiling fan turned in slow, lazy circles, pushing warm air that smelled like baked bread and coffee and the faint sweetness of pie crust around the small dining room. 8 tables, mismatched chairs, a long counter with 6 stools covered in cracked red vinyl. Behind that counter stood Mr. Harlan, the owner, a thick-shouldered man in his late 60s, with a white apron stretched over a generous belly and reading glasses pushed up into thinning gray hair. He wiped the same spot on the counter he had been wiping for 10 minutes, not because it was dirty, but because his hands needed something to do while the afternoon wound down. A transistor radio on the shelf behind him played Merle Haggard low enough that the words blurred into melody, and from the kitchen came the occasional clatter of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. 3 customers, a couple in the corner booth, mid-50s, splitting a piece of lemon meringue and not saying much. An old man at the counter with a folded newspaper and a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he had not noticed because the crossword had him stuck on 17 across. And at the table nearest the window, a girl, 9 years old, small for her age, with dark brown hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail that was already coming undone because she had tied it herself that morning without a mirror. She wore a light blue hoodie 2 sizes too big, the sleeves pushed up past her wrists, and canvas sneakers with one lace untied. In front of her sat a glass of water. She had not touched a cup of hot milk that Mr. Harlan always made for her without being asked, and an old sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of a horse with wings. Her name was Nola Calloway. She came here every afternoon after school, every single afternoon, 5 days a week, sometimes 6. Her mother has worked 2 jobs. Days at Flagstaff Medical Center as a nurse, evening stocking shelves at the hardware store on Route 66. Between those 2 shifts was a gap of about 90 minutes. And in that gap, Darla Calloway would drive across town to pick up her daughter from Red Mesa Diner, take her home, heat up dinner, help with homework if there was time, then head back out into the night. The gap was supposed to be enough. Most days it was, but Darla was rarely on time. Highway 40 had a way of swallowing minutes with its construction zones and its endless parade of trucks heading west toward California. So Nola waited. She always waited. She had gotten good at it the way children get good at things they have no choice about. She had learned to fill the silence with drawings, with stories she told herself inside her head, with watching the door. She watched it now. Every time the bell above the entrance jingled, Nola's eyes would lift from her sketchbook, quick and hopeful, like a bird spotting movement in the grass, and every time it was someone else. A stranger passing through, a regular, coming in for coffee, the wind pushing the door just enough to make the bell whisper. Nola would smile anyway, a small automatic smile that did not quite reach her eyes before she looked back down at her drawing. Mr. Harlan noticed. He always noticed. He had watched this girl wait at that same table for nearly 3 years now, ever since Darla started the second job. He knew the routine. Knew the way Nola's shoulders would tighten when 5 o'clock passed without her mother appearing. Knew the way she would start drawing faster, pressing harder, with her colored pencils as if filling the paper could fill the empty chair across from her. He also knew something else, something Darla had told him quietly one evening when Nola was in the restroom. She had leaned across the counter, voice low, eyes serious in a way that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Keep her here," she had said, "every day, right here where you can see her. If I am ever late, if I ever do not come, you call this number. No one else, just this number." She had written it on a napkin. Mr. Harlan kept that napkin in the register folded beneath the cash tray. He had never needed to use it, but the weight of it was always there, like a stone in his pocket. He did not know why Darla was so specific. He had assumed it was just a single mother being careful. Now wiping the counter for the 11th time, watching Nola draw her winged horse in the dying afternoon light, he wondered if careful was the right word, or if the right word was something closer to afraid. Outside, the desert wind picked up. It rattled the windows in their frames and sent red dust spiraling across the parking lot in little devils that rose and fell and rose again. The Coca-Cola sign creaked on its hinges. A paper napkin blew off the bench outside and cartwheeled across the asphalt into the sagebrush. Inside, the radio switched from Merle to Johnny Cash. The couple in the corner finished their pie. The old man at the counter finally solved 17 across and grunted with satisfaction. A completely ordinary afternoon in a completely ordinary small-town diner in the high desert of northern Arizona. Nobody in that room could have guessed what was coming. The sound started low, so low it could have been thunder rolling in from the San Francisco peaks to the north, or a freight train braking on the tracks 3 miles east. Just a vibration more felt than heard, a deep pulse that traveled through the ground and up through the foundation of Red Mesa Diner and into the soles of Nola's sneakers. She looked up from her drawing, not alarmed, just curious. The vibration grew. It separated from the general noise of the world and became distinct, rhythmic, mechanical, the unmistakable low-frequency thrum of large engines, multiple engines running in loose formation and getting closer. The glass of water in front of Nola began to tremble. Tiny concentric circles appeared on the surface, radiating outward like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. Her hot milk shivered in its cup. Mr. Harlan stopped wiping. His hand froze mid-stroke, the rag bunched in his fist, and he turned his head slowly toward the window. His face changed. The genial diner owner expression, the comfortable small-town warmth, all of it drained away and was replaced by something tight and watchful. He muttered a single phrase under his breath. Hell's Angels. The couple in the corner booth looked at each other. The man reached for his wife's hand under the table. The old man at the counter lowered his newspaper with the careful deliberation of someone who does not want to make sudden movements. The engines were loud now. Not just loud, but physical, a wall of sound that pressed against the windows and shook the ceiling fan in its mount. Nola could feel it in her chest, a deep throbbing that made her heart skip, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming presence of it. And then the engines cut. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It fell over Red Mesa Diner like a blanket thrown over a cage, muffling everything, compressing the air until breathing felt like work. Through the window, Nola could see them. 6 motorcycles gleaming black and chrome parked in a row in the fading red light of the Arizona sunset. Harley-Davidsons, every one of them, their engines ticking as they cooled, their chrome pipes still radiating heat that made the air above them shimmer. The door opened. Cold wind rushed in first, carrying the smell of exhaust and leather and road dust and something else. Something that smelled like distance. Like hundreds of miles of open highway and desert nights and campfire smoke ground into fabric over years. 6 men walked in. They were big. Not just tall, but wide, thick through the shoulders and arms. The kind of men who take up space not because they try to, but because their bodies demand it. Leather jackets covered in patches and pins and embroidered insignia. Thick leather gloves tucked into belts. Heavy boots that hit the tile floor like drum beats. Beards, some gray, some dark, all thick. Tattoos crawling up forearms and necks and disappearing under collars. The small diner shrank around them. The walls seemed to pull inward. The ceiling felt lower. The air grew dense with their presence, with the collective weight of 6 men who had lived hard and ridden harder, and who carried the road with them wherever they went. Customers held their breath. The woman in the corner booth pressed back into her seat, her hand tightening on her husband's, until her knuckles went white. The old man at the counter placed his newspaper flat and put both hands on the counter, where they could be seen, a gesture so instinctive it must have come from decades of understanding that visible hands are safe hands. Mr. Harlan swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed visibly above his apron strings. He gripped the rag in his fist like a lifeline. Only Nola looked it up with something other than fear. She looked up with curiosity. Pure, unfiltered 9-year-old curiosity. The way a child looks at a parade or a thunderstorm or a hawk circling overhead. Not understanding the danger, not registering the tension that had every adult in the room coiled like a spring. Just seeing something big and unusual and interesting in a day that had been until now exactly like every other day. The last man through the door was the tallest. He entered with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never needed to rush because the world rearranges itself around him. Broad through the chest, thick through the arms, with a jaw like an anvil beneath a gray beard trimmed close to the skin. His hair was steel-colored, cropped short, and his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice over deep water. Those eyes scanned the room the way a searchlight sweeps a yard, left to right, top to bottom, missing nothing, cataloging everything. The exits, the customers, the counter, the register, the kitchen door, the girl at the window table. His name was Sledge. He said nothing, just nodded once to his crew, a minimal gesture, chin down, chin up, and they moved deeper into the diner with the coordinated ease of men who have moved together through 1,000 rooms in 1,000 towns. Their boots thudded on the tile, 6 pairs of heavy footsteps falling in loose rhythm like war drums on a distant field. They took the large table in the center of the room, just steps from where Nola sat. The proximity was coincidence, nothing more, but it placed the 9-year-old girl within arm's reach of 6 Hells Angels bikers, and every adult in the diner felt the wrongness of that closeness like a hand around their throat. Sledge sat first. The wooden chair groaned under his weight, a long, threatening creak that made the woman in the corner flinch. He placed both forearms on the table and raised 2 fingers toward Mr. Harlan without looking at him. 6 waters, coffee black. His voice was low and rough. The sound of gravel dragged over stone, and it cut through the silence with the precision of a blade. Mr. Harlan nodded too quickly, turned to the counter, and his hands shook badly enough that the metal spoon clinked against the coffee cup in a rapid, nervous chatter. The bikers settled in, low voices, heads together. The silver-bearded one, the one they called Flint, leaned toward Sledge and spoke in a murmur that barely carried past the table's edge. Getting close. Route she used at matches. Sledge nodded, expressionless. Another biker, long hair tied back tight against his skull. The one called Wire added something in a voice so quiet only those at the table could hear. If she is still around here, we will find her. 3 words. Looking for someone. The adults in the room heard fragments and imagined the worst, exchanged glances heavy with fear and speculation. They did not know who was being sought. They did not want to know. Only Nola, tilting her ear toward the nearby table the way children do when they sense a secret being shared, heard the words without understanding their weight. She understood only that these men were looking for someone, some woman, and that the search was serious. But she was not thinking about the search. She was thinking about the tattoo. Because the moment Sledge had placed his forearms on the table, the sleeves of his leather jacket had ridden up, and there on his left arm, exposed in the warm yellow light of Red Mesa Diner, was a tattoo that made Nola's breath catch in her small chest. A skull wearing a helmet, sharp wings spreading wide from either side. Every line cut deep and dark into the skin, with a faint white outline that made the image seem to lift off the flesh and hover alive and watchful. The detail was extraordinary. The helmet's visor was cracked. The wings had individual feathers etched with a precision that suggested not just artistry, but reverence. Under the diner's lights, the tattoo almost seemed to move, the wings flexing with each shift of Sledge's heavy arm. Nola had seen a tattoo like that before. Not this big, not this fierce, but the same design, the same skull with the same helmet and the same sharp wings. Smaller, much smaller, faded by years and sunlight, sitting right there on the inside of her mother's left wrist. She had touched it 100 times. At bedtime, when Darla would lie next to her and tell old stories, Nola would trace the lines of that little tattoo with her fingertip. The skull, the wings, the tiny crack in the helmet's visor. She would ask what it meant, and Darla would always smile, the same tired, tender smile, and say the same thing. It is a story for when you are older, baby. Nola had accepted that. She was patient about some things, but she had never stopped being curious. And now, sitting 3 feet from a man whose arm carried a version of her mother's secret tattoo blown up to 10 times its size, every line amplified, every detail magnified, that curiosity went from a low simmer to a rolling boil. She tilted her head, left then right, studying the tattoo from different angles, the way she studied her drawings when something was not quite right and she needed to see it fresh. She leaned forward in her chair, elbows on the table, chin in her hands, eyes locked on Sledge's arm with an intensity that would have been unsettling if it had come from an adult, but from a 9-year-old was simply pure. A memory flashed through her mind. Bedtime, the soft cotton of her mother's sleeve pushed up, the small tattoo revealed in the lamplight, her finger tracing the wing, the crack in the visor, Darla's voice warm and distant. The tattoo guy sneezed right in the middle so the line shifted. See that little chip on the right wing? That is his sneeze right there forever. Nola had laughed. Her mother had laughed. It was their little joke. The sneeze tattoo. And now Nola sat 3 feet from Sledge and could see even from this distance, even in the imperfect light, that his tattoo did not have that chip. His was perfect, complete, the wings symmetrical and whole. But her mother's had the chip, the flaw, the sneeze, which meant her mother's tattoo was not a copy. It was something else, something specific, something given. Nola did not understand the significance of this. She was 9. She understood very little about the world of men in leather jackets and the debts they carried and the marks they left on skin to seal promises no contract could hold. She understood only that her mother had a secret, and that secret was sitting at the next table drinking black coffee, and the coincidence was too enormous for a curious child to let pass in silence. She could not hold it in. She pushed up on both hands, rising slightly from her seat, leaning toward the big table where Sledge sat with his crew. Her body language was entirely open. No hesitation, no guile. Just a small girl in an oversized blue hoodie with a lopsided ponytail and one untied shoelace, leaning towards 6 of the most dangerous-looking men she had ever seen with a smile so innocent it could break your heart. And then her voice rang out, clear and bright and light like a bell, struck in a quiet church, carrying effortlessly across the small diner and landing on every ear in the room. "Hello, sir. My mom has a tattoo, just like yours." The words hit the air and detonated, not with noise, but with silence. A silence so complete and so sudden that it felt like the room had been sealed in glass. Every sound stopped. The ceiling fans seemed to pause mid-rotation. The radio went mute. The kitchen dishwasher held its cycle. Mr. Harlan's spoon froze against the cup. The old man's crossword pen hovered above the paper. The couple in the corner stopped breathing. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Sledge did not move. His coffee cup remained at his lips. Steam curled past his gray beard and rose into the still air. His pale blue eyes, which had been focused on something far away, something only he could see, shifted, slowly, with the deliberate precision of a vault door swinging open. They locked on Nola. The girl felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, not painful but enormous, a pressure that pushed against her small body and held her in place the way gravity holds a stone. Sledge's thick brows drew together, casting a shadow over the upper half of his face, and his jaw tightened beneath his beard until the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. He set his coffee down. The cup touched the table without a sound. His hands came to rest on either side of it, palms flat, fingers spread, and the stillness of those hands was more frightening than any fist could have been. Every biker at the table had stopped, one mid-chew jaw hanging open, one with a glass halfway to his mouth, water tilting but not spilling. Colt, the youngest, curly hair tied low at the nape, had his hand on the small knife at his belt. Not drawing it, just touching it, the way a man touches a weapon when his instincts fire before his brain can override them. Wire looked at Sledge, then at the girl. His eyes narrowed. Flint, the silver-bearded elder, leaned back in his chair with the slow caution of a man who has survived decades by knowing when to be very, very still. 6 gazes, 6 levels of hardness, all focused on one target. A 9-year-old girl in a blue hoodie who had just said the one thing no one in this situation should say. Mr. Harlan moved first. He took a half step from behind the counter, one hand raised in a gesture that was half plea, half surrender. His mouth working soundlessly before the words finally came. "Nola. No, sweetheart, do not. Too late." Sledge placed one hand flat on the table. The impact was not hard, but the sound it made, a single heavy thud, carried through the room like a judge's gavel. He leaned forward, elbow on the table, face closer to Nola, eyes never leaving hers, not angry, not threatening, but focused with an intensity that made the air between them feel like it was being compressed into something solid. An older biker growled low. "What did she just say?" Nola blinked. She looked around the room and saw everyone looking at her, every face frozen, every eye wide. She did not understand why. She had asked a simple question, made a simple observation. Mom has a tattoo like yours. What was wrong with that? She smiled again. The same innocent, open smile. The smile that made the situation stranger, not better, because it was so impossibly out of place in the tension that filled that room. My mom has the same tattoo. Really? Right here. She raised her left hand and pointed to the inside of her wrist. The exact spot where Darla showed her. The exact spot where the skull and wings lived in miniature on her mother's skin. A chair somewhere scraped against the floor as someone pressed back against the wall. A woman whispered something that might have been a prayer. Sledge inhaled slowly. He placed both hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and sat very still. When he spoke, his voice was lower than thunder, but sharper than the desert night. What did you say about your mom and my tattoo? Each word was its own sentence. Each word fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. Nola did not flinch. She did not look away. She sat in her chair with her small legs dangling and her lopsided ponytail and her bright, clear eyes, and she answered the way a child answers a teacher's question. My mom has a tattoo just like that one on your arm. A skull with a helmet and wings. She got it a long time ago. Sledge's eyes did not leave hers. Tell me about it. It is smaller than yours, and it has a little chip. Right here on the right wing. She pointed to a spot on her own wrist. Mom said the tattoo guy sneezed right in the middle, so the needle jumped and made a little crack. The effect of those words on the biker table was immediate and devastating. Colt shot to his feet. His chair slammed back against the wall with a crack that made every customer in the diner jump. His hand was on his knife, not drawing it, but gripping it hard enough that his knuckles went white and his voice came out tight and hot. Boss, this sounds like a trap. No kid knows that detail unless someone. Sledge raised one hand. Just that. One hand, open palm, no words. Colt stopped as if he had hit a wall. He stood there, breathing hard, hand on the knife eyes darting between Sledge and the girl. Then slowly he sat back down, but his hand stayed near the blade, and his jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath the skin. Sledge turned back to Nola. His voice had not changed, still low, still measured, still carrying a weight that seemed to compress the air around each syllable. What is your mother's name? Nola did not hesitate. She sat up a little straighter, the way she did when a teacher asked her something she knew the answer to. Darla. Darla Calloway. The name rolled across the table like a cold wave. Sledge's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A tumbler's clicking into place. A door opening onto a room that had been locked for a very long time. Flint leaned forward. His weathered face was creased with the effort of memory, eyes squinting as if looking at something very far away. The rough pinky ring on his right hand caught the light as he raised his hand to his beard and stroked it slowly. Calloway, he said, low, through teeth that barely parted. That name, boss, sounds familiar. 3 words that turned the already thick air into something nearly solid. The couple in the corner booth stood up and moved toward the door, with the careful haste of people trying to leave a building they suspect might be on fire. Mr. Harlan ducked behind the counter until only the top of his head and his eyes were visible, watching. Sledge tapped one finger on the table. Once. A single measured impact that made Nola's water glass ring faintly. Where's your mom's tattoo? Nola answered happily. She was enjoying this. It was like a quiz, and she knew all the answers. Here, sir. She pointed again to the inside of her left wrist. Mom said when she was young she liked tough tattoos. She even showed me the skull with the wings. It looks really cool. Wire leaned in from across the table. His voice was hard and precise. Wide wings, black helmet, and a chip. Nola nodded, fast eyes bright. Yes, a crack on the right wing. Tiny, but I can see it really clear. Mom said the tattoo guy sneezed midway, so it shifted. A low hiss escaped from Colt. His eyes were wide now, the suspicion in them warring with something else. Something that looked like recognition. Sledge placed both hands on the table again, fingers interlaced. He leaned forward until his face was close enough to Nola that she could see every line, every scar, every gray hair in his close-trimmed beard. The vein on his wrist pulsed steady and slow beneath the tattoo's wing. Let me get this straight, he said, each word a footstep on a bridge over a deep canyon. You say your mom's tattoo is identical to mine, and it has the chip on the right wing. Nola nodded. Yes, sir. Very similar. Mom said when she was young, she liked motorcycle people. A sharp exhale from Flint like a blade being drawn from its sheath. He gritted his teeth, eyes distant, looking at a memory no one else in the room could see. Calloway. Darla Calloway. That cannot be coincidence. Sledge was thinking, slow, deliberate. Two fingers tapped the table in a measured rhythm, like a clock counting down to something irreversible. Then he asked, your mom still live in Flagstaff? Yes. Nola nodded hard. Mom is coming to pick me up soon. She works at the hospital, then extra at the store, so I wait here. She is always a little late, but she always comes. She is not lying, Wire murmured. Cannot make up that chip. Cannot know that detail. Colt glanced sideways, voice tight and urgent. If she is not making it up, then that means we. Sledge cut him off with a look. One look, the kind that closes mouths and opens ears. The entire table went silent. The entire diner followed because everyone was waiting for Sledge, the only man with the authority to decide what happened next. He sat very still, hands interlaced, head slightly tilted as if weighing something on an invisible scale. A secret as heavy as all the years and miles between this moment and the one it connected to. Then he spoke, slowly enough that every person in Red Mesa Diner held their breath to hear. Calloway, Darla Calloway. If that is who I think, he paused. The couple by the door gripped each other's hands. Colt's fingers twitched near his knife. Mr. Harlan's eyes were wide above the counter. Nola tilted her head. No fear, just a child waiting for the end of a sentence. Sledge let out a breath that carried more than air. It carried years. Then this child is not random. She just mentioned a name we have owed for over 10 years. The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of the clock above the kitchen door sounded like a hammer on an anvil. And from that moment, no one in Red Mesa Diner looked at Nola the same way. She was no longer a child who had spoken out of turn. She was the bridge to a past that even Hell's Angels had not expected would ever find them again. Sledge did not take his eyes off Nola, but the quality of his gaze had changed entirely. The cold assessment was gone. The predatory focus was gone. In its place was something searching, something almost tender, as if he were looking at a photograph he had believed was lost forever and finding it whole and undamaged in the hands of a stranger. He pressed on, but his low voice had shed its edge. Curiosity had replaced command. Your mom, Darla Calloway, do you know where she got that tattoo? Why she has it? Nola fiddled with her hoodie zipper, twisting it between her fingers. Well, Mom said a guy paid her back by tattooing it for her, but she does not tell me the details. She says she will tell me when I am older. A soft sound escaped from Flint. Not a laugh, something older than laughter. The sound of a memory being pulled out of storage and held up to the light after a long time in the dark. He leaned his elbow on the table and turned to Sledge. His deep-set eyes were focused on something far away, something only he could see. A dusty road, a warehouse, a night that smelled like blood and gasoline. Boss Calloway. That name is no coincidence. He spoke so quietly only the biker table could hear. Vegas, 2012. She once saved one of ours, a bad brawl behind the old warehouse district on the east side. Without her, he would have died right there on that dirt road. Sledge turned his head. His eyes flashed with something sharp and bright, like a blade catching the light. She. Flint nodded, more certain now. I do not forget because her tattoo had the chip on the right wing. Who else has that specific flaw but the one tattooed when the artist sneezed? Sledge looked at Nola. His eyes asked a question he did not need to speak. Nola nodded innocently. Yes, exactly, sir. My mom says the same thing about the sneeze. Colt's eyes went wide. Wire let out a stunned puff of air. The woman near the back of the diner dropped her fork with a clatter that rang through the silence like a bell. Every eye in the room, from strangers to bikers, focused on the small girl in the light blue hoodie, legs swinging gently from a chair too tall for her. A smile on her face that belonged to a world simpler than this one. A 9-year-old had just confirmed a detail that only two kinds of people could possibly know. The one who gave the tattoo and the one who was saved. Sledge lowered his coffee cup to the table with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that large. No more threatening taps, No more measured impacts. Just an oddly careful motion, as if the cup were made of glass and the table were made of memory. Kid, he said, and the word came out different, softer. The gravel in his voice washed clean by something that sounded like rain on dry earth, revealing something very human underneath. You say your mom is Darla Calloway. You sure about that? Yes, I am sure. She is my mom. Nola answered with the fierce, automatic pride that children have for their parents. The kind that does not need reasons because it runs deeper than reasons. Colt sighed, long and slow. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that evening, his hand came away from the knife handle and rested on his thigh. If that is the case, the kid is not lying, Wire nodded. You cannot fake that chip. Impossible. Sledge closed his eyes just for a moment. A pause so brief that if you blinked, you would miss it. But in that fraction of a second, the lines on his face deepened, and the set of his jaw softened, and he looked for one heartbeat, like a man standing at the edge of something he had spent 12 years trying to forget and finding that he could not. He opened his eyes and looked at Nola, not to assess, not to evaluate, but the way you look at someone who has brought you news from a country you left long ago and never expected to hear from again. Your mom, Sledge said, slowly, measuring each word as if placing stones to build a path across a river. She is a good person. She saved one of our brothers. And her having a tattoo like mine, that is not coincidence. Nola tilted her head, her eyes wide and round as marbles. Really? My mom knows you guys. No one answered right away. All 6 bikers looked at Sledge. Clearly only he had the right to answer that question. Sledge exhaled, a long, controlled breath that carried the weight of years and miles and debts unpaid. More than knows, he said. Your mom was someone we owed a debt to, and that debt has never been repaid. A wave of stillness covered the table. No more threat, no more suspicion, just recognition. The quiet click of 2 pieces of a broken thing finding each other after a long separation. Darla of 2012 and the child named Nola of 2024. The other customers in the diner may not have understood the full picture, but they felt the shift. It was physical, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm breaks. A man who had been reaching for his coat to leave lowered his arm. The woman in the corner let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. The air loosened, but it did not become comfortable because now everyone understood that the men sitting at that table were not hunting an enemy. They had just realized they were sitting next to the daughter of someone who had once pulled one of their own back from the edge of death. Sledge did not look away from Nola. His gaze held something now that had not been there before. Something that looked like reverence. Not for the child herself, though there was tenderness in it, but for the woman who was not in the room. The woman who had earned that tattoo. Nola, he said, first time using her name, first time saying it gently. Your mom, Darla, is she safe? Where does she work? The way he asked was not an interrogation. It was the way you ask about someone you have not seen in years but have never stopped thinking about. A relative lost to distance. A friend separated by circumstance. Nola smiled. She thought it was perfectly normal that adults cared about her mom. Everyone who met Darla Calloway cared about her. It was just how things were. Yes, my mom is coming to pick me up soon. She works 2 places, so she is often late, but she is really good. She always helps people. Even when she is tired, she helps. Sledge nodded slowly. A biker at the far end of the table murmured, just like back then. Flint leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused, looking at a memory 12 years old. Darla Calloway, he said. She has not changed. Colt crossed his arms. For the first time that evening, the tension in his body unwound like a fist opening. So the kid really is family. Sledge looked at each of his men. His eyes carried a signal that required no words. Sit calm. Listen. Then he turned back to Nola. The kid is Darla Calloway's daughter. Not the target we are looking for. Not an enemy. This is family of the woman who saved our brother. Every biker at the table nodded, a slight synchronized motion like a verdict being sealed. And that was the first turning point. The moment the child in front of them shifted from unknown to known, from possible threat to something sacred. The daughter of the woman who had walked into danger with her bare hands and cheap antiseptic and pulled a dying man back into the world. Sledge settled into his chair with the measured calm of a man who has made a decision and is now at peace with it. He laced his fingers together and looked at Nola with eyes that held the weight of a past she knew nothing about. Nola, let me tell you a story. He spoke low, but with a softness that silenced the other bikers more effectively than any command. A story from 2012, Las Vegas. Around the diner, the customers who had been inching toward the exit stopped. The old man at the counter turned on his stool. Mr. Harlan emerged from behind the counter. Even the wind outside seemed to quiet, as if the desert itself leaned in to listen. Nola propped both elbows on the table chin in her hands. Her eyes were wide and eager the way they always got when her mother started a bedtime story. She had no way of knowing that the story Sledge was about to tell was written not in imagination, but in blood and luck, in the stubborn refusal of one young woman to look away from suffering. Back then, Sledge began. His pale eyes stared through the diner window into the darkness beyond, as if the Arizona night were a screen showing a film only he could see. One of our brothers named Raven was passing through the outskirts of Vegas. Simple trip, supposed to take less than 3 hours. Returning something to an old friend. He paused. The pause held the room. Nobody expected it to turn into an ambush. Colt bowed his head. His hands, finally free of the knife, were clenched into fists on his thighs. Flint closed his eyes, and behind those closed lids played a memory that still had sound and smell and pain. They jumped a Raven on a dirt road near the old warehouse district on the east side of Vegas. Sledge continued. Lights off. 4 men. They did not want police knowing, and they wanted him dead right there in the dirt. A customer covered their mouth. Nola leaned forward, her small face serious with concentration. They beat him bad, Sledge said. Broken ribs, torn shoulder, bleeding from places you should not bleed from. Raven thought he was done. He crawled away from them, dragged himself across the dirt toward an old motel, and he saw a small light in a window. Sledge's eyes came back from the distance and settled on Nola. That light was your mom's. Nola's lips parted. Her eyes grew even wider. My mom was there. Sledge nodded. Darla Calloway, alone in a tiny room. A nursing intern with barely enough money to eat, living in a motel that charged by the week. Raven knocked on her door, or more like collapsed against it, half dead, bleeding through his clothes. He leaned forward. Do you know what your mom did? Nola shook her head. Her hands were clasped tight against her chest. Your mom opened the door. Sledge spoke each word with the precision of someone laying bricks, building something that would last. She did not ask who he was. She was not scared of the blood, not scared of the tattoos, not scared of what people fear about men like us. She pulled him inside. She locked the door, and she used everything she had in that room to stop his bleeding. Hot water, old towels, rubbing alcohol. The same hands she used to care for patients at the hospital, she used to save a stranger's life on a motel room floor. Wire's voice came in low and reverent. If Darla had left Raven outside that door, he would be dead. No question. Sledge nodded. And that is not all. The men who attacked him, they did not give up. They came to that motel, room by room, banging on doors, looking for the biker they had not finished killing. He looked at Nola, and his voice dropped to the register of a ghost story told around a fire, but his eyes were full of something that looked like awe. If your mom had gotten scared, if she had turned Raven in, or opened the door, or even hesitated, they would have stormed that room and finished what they started. Nola swallowed. Her small throat moved visibly. What did my mom do? Your mom, Sledge said, hid Raven under the bed. Gave him her only blanket. Then she stood at the door. Stood there. And when 4 men who had just beaten a man half to death came to that door and asked if she had seen anyone, your mother looked them straight in the eyes. Colt picked up the thread, his young voice low and distant, like a motorcycle rumbling far down a highway. She said no. 2 words. Did not flinch. Did not look away. They stared right into her eyes, and they believed her. Sledge leaned back slightly. The motion was slow, almost reverent, as if the memory still stunned him after all these years. After that, Sledge continued, your mom cared for Raven for 3 days, bandaged him, fed him, kept him hidden, kept him alive when his body wanted to quit. 3 days in a room the size of a closet with a dying biker, and the knowledge that the men who wanted him dead were still out there looking. The diner was absolutely silent. Not the tense, frightened silence of earlier. A different kind. The kind that falls over a room when something true is being told. Something that matters. When Raven could stand again, Sledge said he was so grateful to your mom that he could not find the words. She saved his life. She did what most people would never do. Not for a stranger, not for someone the whole world had already decided was dangerous. He traced the edge of his own tattoo with one finger. The skull, the helmet, the sharp symmetrical wings. Raven wanted to bring her to meet us, to thank her properly. But your mom refused. She did not want to be involved. She did not want danger. She just said one thing. Nola leaned in. What did she say? Sledge's voice softened to barely above a whisper. She said, please live kindly. Do not let anyone else die if you can help it. The words hung in the air like smoke from a candle just blown out. So Raven gave her the tattoo, Sledge continued. A variant of our traditional mark. Not to show membership, not to make her one of us, but to protect her. Nola tilted her head. Protect? How, sir? In our world, Sledge said that tattoo is a promise. Whoever sees it, any member, anywhere, anytime, knows the person wearing it saved one of our own. And that person is protected. No one touches them. No one threatens them. No one harms them. That tattoo is a safe passage that never expires. Nola's mouth fell open. Her eyes glistened in the diner light, wet and bright and full of a feeling too large for her small body to contain. My mom saved Uncle Raven. Not just saved. Sledge's voice carried the low, heavy resonance of absolute conviction. Your mom risked her life, stood between a dying man and the people trying to kill him. Not everyone has that courage. Not everyone helps someone the world has already decided to fear. Wire exhaled hard through his nose. Thanks to her, Raven is alive today. Thanks to her, we know what kindness in the desert really looks like. Nola lowered her head. Her small hands trembled in her lap. Not from fear, from something much bigger. Something that was rearranging the architecture of her understanding brick by brick. Because all her life she had thought her mother was just a tired woman who worked 2 jobs. A woman who was always late. A woman who smelled like antiseptic in cardboard boxes. A woman who hummed off-key while making macaroni and fell asleep in her clothes on the couch. A woman who was ordinary in every way that mattered except that she loved her daughter with a ferocity that made up for everything else. Nola had never imagined that this same woman had once hidden a dying biker under a motel bed, face down 4 killers, with nothing but 2 words and steady eyes, and saved a man's life with hot water and cheap rubbing alcohol and 3 days of sleepless, solitary courage. She whispered it so quietly the words were almost lost to the room. My mom is a hero, sir. Sledge looked at her, and for the first time that evening, he smiled. It was a small thing, barely a movement at the corners of his mouth, but it changed his entire face. The ice in his eyes melted just for a moment, and behind it was warmth. Real warmth. The kind that comes from recognizing something good in a world that too often pretends goodness does not exist. Yeah, Nola. In our world, your mom is a hero, and that sentence at that exact moment, in that small diner in the high desert of Arizona, changed the way Nola saw her mother forever. She was still sitting there, hands pressed together, eyes bright with tears. She was too proud to let fall when the phone in her backpack rang. It cut through the silence like a saw blade, a sharp, insistent electronic trill that had no business in a room that had just held something sacred. Nola startled, nearly knocking over her water glass, and scrambled to dig the phone out of the cloth bag at her feet. The bag was patched with a little fox that her mother had sewn on by hand, and the sewers stuck the way it always did. And by the time she got the phone free, it had rung 6 times. The screen showed 2 words, Mom, and a weak signal icon that flickered between 1 bar and none. Nola answered, Mom, are you here? Darla's voice came through, broken and static-laced, as if the signal were being dragged through gravel. Nola, can you hear me? Hi, Mom. Yes, I hear you. Are you close? Car broke. The words came in fragments, separated by bursts of white noise. Dark road, men coming. The static screeched. A harsh grating sound like something metal being dragged across concrete. Nola pressed the phone hard against her ear. Mom, I can barely hear you. Where are you? Are you okay? Darla's voice returned, but it had changed. The calm, steady tone that Nola associated with her mother was gone. In its place was something raw, something that sounded like fear stripped of all pretense. There is someone approaching. I do not know who. Nola, listen to me. Do not leave the diner. Do not go outside. Stay with Mr. Harlan. Do you hear me? Stay. The signal dropped. The screen went dark. Mom. Mom. Nola jumped up from her chair. Her face was white. The blood had left her cheeks so fast she looked like a different child from the one who had been smiling 30 seconds ago. The entire diner turned. Wire was already half out of his seat. Colt stood with fists clenched. Sledge rotated his head slowly like a radar dish locking onto a signal. His pale blue eyes found Nola, and the warmth that had been in them moments ago was gone, replaced by something older, harder. The eyes of a man who has heard the sound of trouble 1,000 times and never once ignored it. Let me hear, he said. Nola handed over the phone with shaking hands. Sledge looked at the screen, saw the lost signal, saw the call duration. 7 seconds. What did you hear? Nola swallowed. It took her 2 tries to get the words out. My mom is stuck. Her car broke down. On a dark road. She said strangers are coming toward her. Colt exhaled as if someone had punched him in the chest. Flint swore under his breath a single sharp word that cut the air. Wire's face went from stone to something colder than stone. Mr. Harlan stammered from behind the counter, his face the color of old paste. Could just be good people, wanting to help. Maybe someone. Colt shook his head. Nobody wanders 89A after dark looking to help strangers. Not that road. Not this time of night. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Every person in the room understood what he was not saying. Sledge stood. He rose from his chair with the slow, inexorable force of a tide coming in. His full height unfolded, and his shadow covered half the table and reached across the floor to touch the wall. He looked at his crew, all 5 of them, and his eyes were no longer soft, no longer searching, no longer anything except absolutely certain. We owe her. 3 words. No one objected, no one hesitated, no one asked a question or raised a concern or suggested they wait for more information. 6 men who moments ago had looked like dangerous machinery suddenly activated. They became what they had always been underneath the leather and the tattoos and the road dust. A unit, a team, a family. Flint pulled on his jacket with the practiced efficiency of a man who has dressed for emergencies more times than he can count. Colt grabbed his helmet. Wire checked the chain at his belt. A series of metal sounds, buckles and zippers and snaps filled the diner, like the sound of an army preparing to move. Sledge bent to Nola's level. His face was close to hers, and this time the proximity carried no threat. Only protection. Only the fierce, focused energy of a man who has decided to act and will not be stopped. Nola. His large hand settled lightly on her shoulder. You are not going out alone. We are going to find your mom. Sir, Nola's voice cracked. Her lower lip trembled so hard the words came out broken. You will really help my mom? Sledge nodded. Not just help. We are repaying a debt that has been hanging for 12 years. Colt added from behind his young voice, carrying a hard edge that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with loyalty. Nobody touches Darla Calloway's people. Not while we are alive. Another biker standing near the door half smiled and half growled. Whoever is out there planning to harm her better be ready for what is coming. Mr. Harlan stumbled out from behind the counter. You are really going. Sledge turned. His eyes were sharp enough to cut. Mr. Harlan, hold the diner. Keep everyone safe. We handle the rest. Then back to Nola. Are you brave enough to come with us? We will find your mom faster if you show us which route she takes. Nola did not hesitate. Not for a second. Yes, I will go. Colt bent down and held out the smallest helmet from the group's supplies. It was too big for her head. It sat loosely on her dark hair and made her look even smaller than she was. But it would do. Sledge issued orders with the crisp efficiency of a military commander. 2 bikes with the kid, 3 ahead clearing the road. I ride tail. Everyone copy. They copied. They moved. They stepped out of Red Mesa Diner into the Arizona night, and the neon sign cast their shadows long and sharp across the parking lot. 6 towering men in leather surrounding a small girl in a blue hoodie and an oversized helmet. Inside, the remaining customers pressed against the windows, faces lit by the diner's glow eyes, witty and unblinking. A woman whispered, "They are really going to protect that little girl." The old man at the counter, the one with the crossword, said it quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear. Not just the girl. They are protecting their debt. Sledge mounted his Harley. The engine fired with a deep chest-rattling roar that shook the ground and sent vibrations through the diner's foundation. He looked at Nola. One nod. Get on. Nola climbed behind Colt on his bike. Her small arms wrapped around his leather-covered back hands, barely meeting across his broad frame. She held on the way. Children hold on to things that matter. With everything she had. 6 engines roared to life in unison. The sound was enormous. It filled the parking lot and rolled out across the desert in every direction, a wall of thunder that sent small animals running and made the sagebrush tremble. 6 headlight beams snapped on, cutting the darkness like bright spears aimed at the horizon. Sledge spoke the last words before the pack left the lot. His voice barely audible above the engines, but every biker heard it because they were listening with more than their ears. Find Darla Calloway, whatever it takes. And under the Arizona desert moon, with the stars spread out above them like scattered diamonds on black velvet, the Hells Angels biker pack surged forward into the night. 6 machines, 6 men, and 1 small girl in an oversized helmet riding toward her mother on a promise that had waited 12 years to be kept. The engines tore the Arizona night wide open. 6 Harley Davidsons in tight formation, headlights blazing white against the black desert highway, cutting through the darkness like bright swords swung by invisible hands. The sound was enormous. Not just loud, but layered a chord of deep mechanical thunder that rolled across the empty landscape and bounced off canyon walls and scattered into the sage-covered flats on either side of Highway 89A. Red dust kicked up behind the rear wheels in rooster tails that glowed briefly in the taillights before dissolving into nothing. The wind was hard and cold, carrying the smell of creosote and cooling sand and the faint chemical tang of distant wildfire smoke from somewhere south. The moon hung low and fat over the eastern horizon, the color of old copper, casting just enough light to turn the roadside saguaros into tall, dark sentinels standing watch over an empty kingdom. Nola clung to Colt's back with everything her small body had. Her arms wrapped tight around his leather jacket, her fingers laced together across his chest, her cheek pressed flat against the space between his shoulder blades. The oversized helmet shifted on her head with every gust of wind, and her hair whipped out from beneath the rim in dark streamers that snapped and fluttered behind her. She was not afraid. That was the thing that would have surprised anyone watching. A 9-year-old girl on the back of a Harley Davidson rocketing through the desert night at 60 miles an hour, surrounded by 6 Hells Angels bikers. And she was not afraid. Her heart was pounding, yes. Her hands were trembling, yes. But not from fear, from something else entirely. From the overwhelming sense that something enormous was happening, something she could feel but not name, something that had weight and momentum and was carrying her forward into a part of her life that would never look the same as the part she had left behind in that diner. The pack rode in perfect formation. 3 lid bikes spread in a loose arrowhead, their headlights sweeping the road ahead, and the shoulders on either side illuminating every bush, every shadow, every piece of roadside debris that could hide danger. Colt and Nola rode in the center of the formation, flanked and shielded the most protected position like cargo too valuable to risk. And at the rear riding tail came Sledge. His single yellow headlight cut a narrower beam than the others, and it flickered in the wind like the steady eye of something ancient and watchful. He rode with the calm of a man who has been in 1,000 dangerous situations and survived them all by paying attention to the things other people miss. And right now, Sledge was paying attention to something the riders ahead had not noticed. A light. Small. Yellow. The tail light of a vehicle maybe half a mile back, holding steady in the darkness. Not gaining, not falling behind. Just there. Matching their speed with a precision that was too perfect to be accidental. Sledge tilted his head slightly and eased off his throttle by a fraction. Just enough to let the gap between himself and the formation open by a few yards. Just enough to get a cleaner look at what was behind them. The darkness parted for a moment as the road curved and the moonlight hit the vehicle at the right angle. A sedan, silver, old model coated in dust so thick the paint was barely visible. No police markings, no commercial logos. Just a nondescript car following 6 motorcycles through the empty desert night with the patient, unhurried persistence of a shadow that cannot be shaken. Sledge's jaw tightened beneath his beard. He flashed his headlight twice. Quick, deliberate, a signal his crew had used for 20 years. It meant one thing and one thing only. Tail. Flint checked his mirror first. The silver-bearded rider adjusted his position, glanced back and found the yellow dot in the darkness. He keyed the small intercom built into his helmet. "See it," he said. "Wire confirmed from the left flank. Been there since the last curve. Thought it was a local, but locals do not drive like that." Colt felt the formation shift around him. The subtle change in spacing, the tightening of the pack, the way the other bikes adjusted their positions, like a flock of predatory birds reorganizing around a nest they were protecting. He did not look back. He did not need to. He felt the message through the movement of the machines around him. He glanced down for half a second at the small arms wrapped around his midsection. Then he gripped the handlebars tighter, rolled the throttle forward, and the Harley beneath them surged with a guttural roar. Nola felt Colt's body tense. The leather under her cheek went rigid, and the bike's acceleration pressed her back against the sissy bar. She tightened her grip. "Sir, what is wrong?" Colt's voice came back flat and steady over the wind. "Nothing, kid. Hold tight." Behind them, Sledge made a decision. He did not accelerate. Instead, he held his speed and watched the sedan do the same. When he slowed slightly, the sedan slowed. When the formation took a curve and the headlights swept right, the sedan maintained its distance with mechanical precision. Not coincidence. Not a lost traveler, not a curious local following a motorcycle pack for the thrill of it. This was a tale. "It is tracking us," Wire said through the intercom. "No turn signals. No passing attempt. It knows where we are going before we do." Sledge's voice came through like rolling thunder. "If it is connected to whoever was threatening Darla, it will not quit." The road narrowed as the pack entered a series of sharp curves cut into the hillside. Juniper trees closed in on both sides, their branches reaching over the asphalt like grasping hands. The pavement was rough here, patched and repatched over years of freeze-thaw cycles that split the surface into a mosaic of cracks. Far ahead, red blinking lights marked a construction zone. Reduced speed signs, road surface torn up into raw earth ridges that could throw a bike sideways if you hit them wrong. "Watch the construction," Wire called. The lead bike slowed. Colt leaned his Harley through the first set of ridges with the practiced ease of a man who had ridden bad roads in every state west of the Mississippi. Nola squeezed him hard, her small body pressing against his back as the bike jolted over uneven ground. She bit her lip but did not cry out. One by one, the formation cleared the construction zone, bikes weaving through the torn-up surface with the choreographed precision of dancers avoiding obstacles in the dark. Sledge was last, and Sledge had to choose. The final ridge came up fast, a raw earth mound where the construction crew had left equipment barriers half in the lane. He could hit the dirt and risk losing traction, or he could dodge hard right and scrape through the gap between the barrier and the shoulder. He chose the gap. His Harley leaned so far over that the left foot peg threw sparks against the asphalt, a shower of bright orange points that arced into the darkness and died. Sledge's body shifted with the bike counterweighting instinctively, his knee nearly brushing the road surface. And for one frozen moment, he was horizontal against the earth, gravity pulling him down and speed pushing him through, and then the bike straightened and he was past. Behind him, the sedan reacted too late. The driver braked hard, tires locking the rear end, swinging out in a skid that raised a cloud of dust. The car lurched up over the dirt ridge, bounced once, twice, and came to a shuddering halt halfway off the road. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the sedan's headlights came back on. The engine revved. The car straightened on the road and started moving again. Slower now, but still there. Still following. Sledge checked his mirror. His voice was flat when he spoke. "Still on us. This is not random." Colt hunched lower over his handlebars. "Can you see the plate?" "Lost it in the dust." "Who tails 6 bikers in the middle of the desert?" Wire said. "Unless they are either very stupid or very motivated." Nola heard the tension in their voices even through the wind and the engine noise. She pressed her face harder into Colt's back. "Sir, is that the person who was scaring my mom?" Colt did not answer right away. Then slow and deliberate. "I do not know, but nobody's going to touch your mom or you. Remember that." Up ahead, the road opened onto a long, straight stretch. Wire shouted from the lead position. Intersection coming. If Darla is stuck somewhere, probably near here. Mile marker 1112, somewhere in that stretch. Sledge throttled up. The formation responded as one accelerating out of the curves and onto the straightaway. 6 headlights merged into a continuous streak of white, illuminating the road ahead like a runway lit for an emergency landing. Nola saw the bikers' faces in the fleeting moonlight. Serious, focused, jaws set, eyes narrow against the wind. These were not men playing at heroism. These were men riding toward a debt they had carried for 12 years. And the weight of that debt was in every line of their bodies and every rotation of their wheels. The sedan behind them fell back slightly on the straight stretch, as if the driver knew the open road offered no cover and chose to hang back rather than be identified. But it did not leave. It stayed, a patient shadow, dark and persistent, waiting. And then Colt saw something ahead. Someone on the road, he shouted. The headlights swung hard right as the formation adjusted. White light flooded the pitch-black shoulder of Highway 89A, and there in the sudden brilliance, Nola saw her mother. Darla Calloway stood beside her old blue sedan, which was parked at a crooked angle on the gravel shoulder, one tire off the road entirely, the driver's door hanging open as if she had gotten out in a hurry and had not thought to close it. The hazard lights blinked in weak, tired pulses, orange flashes that barely penetrated the darkness. And in front of Darla, close enough to reach out and touch her, stood a man. He was big, thick through the shoulders and the gut, with a red face and small eyes and hands that held a short iron bar, the way you hold something you have been told to hold, not comfortably but obediently. He swayed on his feet and his voice was loud enough to carry across the distance, even over the approaching engines. "I told you not to run," he was shouting, the words slurred and wet. "You scratched my car, you think you can just leave. Get back here." Darla was backing up, step by step, her hands raised in front of her palms, out the universal gesture of a person trying to calm a situation they know is about to become violent. Her foot caught on a rock and she stumbled, nearly going down, catching herself at the last second with a hand on the hood of her car. Nola screamed. The sound tore out of her small body with a force that surprised even her. A single word, raw and desperate, cutting through engine noise and wind and distance. "Mom!" Darla's head snapped toward the oncoming wall of headlights. Her eyes went wide. Joy and terror collided on her face because she did not know who was coming, only that they were coming fast and they were coming loud, and her daughter's voice was somehow in the middle of all of it. Sledge did not hesitate. He did not slow down to assess the situation. He did not call for a formation change. He did not do anything except what 12 years of carrying a debt had prepared him to do. He opened the throttle all the way. His Harley lunged forward like a thing released from a chain, the engine screaming, the front wheel lifting slightly before slamming back down on the asphalt. The man with the iron bar turned. Headlights hit his face like a wall of white fire. He threw up one hand to shield his eyes, squinting, mouth hanging open, the iron bar dangling, forgotten, at his side. Sledge did not stop. He calculated. Every meter, every second. The distance between the man and Darla, the angle of approach, the speed required. And at the last possible moment, he leaned the bike hard left, planted his right boot on the asphalt, and brought the Harley to a controlled stop that placed 1,200 pounds of steel and chrome directly between the man and the woman he was threatening. A wall, a living, breathing, engine-growling wall of leather and iron, and 12 years of unpaid gratitude. "Step back." Sledge's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It came from somewhere deep in his chest and carried across the night air with the weight of absolute authority. The kind of voice that does not make requests. The man stumbled backward. Who? Who are you?" "None of your concern." Colt and 2 more bikers skidded to a halt behind Sledge. There are bikes forming a wide arc around Darla. Flint dismounted with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who has been in enough confrontations to know that speed is less important than presence. He stood to his full height, nearly as tall as Sledge, and fixed the man with a stare that had 60 years of hard living behind it. "A minor car scratch does not give a man the right to chase a woman down a dark road with an iron bar," Flint said. His voice was cold and controlled, each word placed like a brick in a wall. The man swore, his voice shook with a mixture of fear and belligerence. "I just wanted her to stop. She ran. She ran because you are too far gone to know what you are doing," Colt cut in. He stepped off his bike and crossed the distance to the man's sedan in 3 quick strides. His hand flashed out and snatched the keys from the ignition, with a move so fast the man only gaped. "Hey, give those back." The man lurched forward, but Sledge raised one hand, an open palm. Not a fist, not a threat, just a hand held out at chest height, and the gesture carried enough implicit force to freeze the man on the road as if he had walked into a glass wall. "Nobody touches Darla Calloway's family," Sledge said, each word ground out between his teeth like stone against stone. The man looked around. For the first time, he seemed to register what he was facing. 6 men in leather, tattoos visible on every forearm, chrome and steel machines idling around him in a half circle, eyes that reflected the headlights like the eyes of wolves caught in a flashlight beam. Wire pulled out his phone. His voice was calm and professional, a man who had made this kind of call before. "Got a man threatening a woman on the shoulder of 89A near mile marker 12. We have his keys. No one is hurt. Yes, we will wait." Nola was already off the bike. She scrambled over the seat, hit the ground running, and covered the 20 feet between Colt's Harley and her mother in a sprint that was all pumping arms and flying hair, and the oversized helmet bouncing on her head. She slammed into Darla with enough force to stagger them both. "Mom," the word came out in a sob. "I was so scared. I heard you on the phone. I thought something happened to you." Darla caught her daughter and held on with both arms. Her face was pressed into Nola's hair, and her eyes were squeezed shut, and her whole body was shaking with the slow, deep tremors of someone who has been holding terror at bay for a long time and has finally been given permission to feel it. "It is okay now, baby. I am okay. I am right here." She held Nola for a long time, held her the way you hold something fragile that you almost lost. And only when she was sure, absolutely sure that her daughter was real and whole and safe, did she allow herself to look up at the 6 men who had appeared out of the darkness like armored angels. Her eyes moved from face to face. Leather, patches, tattoos, the Hells Angels insignia she had last seen 12 years ago in a motel room that smelled like blood and rubbing alcohol. "You," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. Sledge stepped forward. He removed his helmet, and the moonlight caught his steel gray hair and the deep lines around his pale blue eyes. He held the helmet at his side like a soldier at ease. "We are friends of Raven," he said. The name hit Darla like a physical blow. Her head rocked back slightly, and her hand tightened on Nola's shoulder, and for a moment she looked as if she might fall. Not from weakness, from the sheer weight of the past landing on the present with no warning. "Raven," she breathed. 2012. Sledge nodded. "You saved his life. Tonight we are repaying a small part of that debt." The man with the iron bar was on his knees now, held in place by Flint's steady hand on his shoulder. Not struck, not harmed, just held sitting still in the dirt on the road shoulder, waiting for the police he could already hear in the distance. He was trembling. Whatever fight had been in him was gone, drained out by the realization of what he had walked into. But Darla was not looking at him. She was looking at the bikers. And something was changing behind her eyes. Something was sharpening. The fear that had been there moments ago was being replaced by something else. Something diagnostic. Something that came from 12 years of nursing, of observing patients, of reading the small involuntary signals that bodies produce when they are in distress or deceit. She looked at the man on his knees. She had been too frightened before, too focused on survival to notice the details. But now, with Nola safe in her arms and 6 bikers standing between her and danger, her training kicked in, and with the force of a reflex she could not override. The man's pupils, she noticed them first. They were not dilated the way a drunk's should be. They were sharp, focused, tracking movement with a precision that no amount of alcohol would allow. His coordination, too. He had stumbled, yes, swayed, yes, but his falls had been controlled. Theatrical. The kind of stumbling that a sober person does when they are pretending to be impaired. And his hands. Even now, kneeling in the dirt with Flint's grip on his shoulder, his hands were steady. No tremor, no shake, nothing. Darla's blood went cold. She pulled Nola closer and looked at Sledge. Her voice, when it came, was low and urgent and carried a certainty that made every biker turn toward her. "He is not drunk." Sledge frowned. "What?" "That man." Darla's eyes never left the figure on his knees. His pupils are constricted. His motor control is too coordinated. His hands are not shaking. I have worked the emergency room for 8 years. I know what intoxication looks like, and that is not it. He is pretending. Silence fell over the group. Heavy, charged. Sledge looked at the man, then back at Darla. You are saying he is faking. Darla nodded. And I am saying this was not random. Someone sent him here to keep me on this road, to hold me in one place. She took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was steady in a way that went beyond courage. It was the steadiness of a woman who had been afraid for weeks and had finally found the shape of the thing she was afraid of. I have been watched, she said, for the last 3 weeks. A car I did not recognize parked near our house. Silent phone calls at 2 in the morning. Someone asking about me at the hospital, wanting to know my schedule, my shifts when I leave. I thought I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid. She looked at Sledge with eyes that held no illusion. I was not imagining things. This man was sent to intercept me, and whoever sent him is still out there. The bikers exchanged glances. The levity that had crept into the group after the rescue drained away like water from a cracked vessel. Colt swore under his breath. That sedan, the one that tailed us from Flagstaff. It is connected. Wire moved fast. He crossed to the kneeling man and crouched in front of him, pulling the man's phone from his jacket pocket with a deftness that spoke of long practice. The man flinched, but did not resist. Whatever role he had been playing, the script, had ended the moment 6 bikers surrounded him. Wire tapped the screen. It was unlocked. He scrolled through the messages, his face lit by the phone's blue glow, and after 10 seconds his expression changed. The calm professional mask cracked, and something colder slid into place beneath it. He stood and walked to Sledge, held the phone out. One message from a blocked number received 47 minutes ago. Sledge read it. His face did not change, but his hand tightened on the phone until the case creaked. The message said 5 words. Keep her there. I am coming. Sledge looked at Flint. The silver-bearded biker met his gaze and something passed between them. Recognition. The shared memory of a name they had not spoken in years. Flint said it firmed. Soren. Deke Soren. He is still out there. The kneeling man flinched at the name. It was involuntary. A twitch of the shoulders, a quick intake of breath. Small movements, but to 6 men trained to read body language the way most people read road signs, it was as good as a confession. Sledge handed the phone to Wire. His voice was quiet and hard. Deke Soren ran the crew that ambushed Raven in Vegas, Lone Shark, pawn shop front on the east side. He sent 4 men to kill Raven over a debt that was not even real. Just an excuse to eliminate a witness to his other business. He looked at Darla. And Darla Calloway is the only person alive who saw those 4 men. Who could identify them? Who could connect them back to Soren? Darla closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was no surprise in them. Just the grim confirmation of something she had suspected, but hoped was not true. 12 years, she said quietly. He waited 12 years. Soren is patient, Flynn said. Always has been. Runs on grudges the way other men run on ambition. If he has found you after all this time, he is not coming to talk. The police sirens were closer now. Red and blue lights flickered against the distant hills. In minutes, the officers would arrive, take the kneeling man, file a report about a drunk threatening a woman on the highway, and drive away. A routine call, a minor incident. Except it was not minor. And the man on his knees was not drunk. And the real danger was not kneeling in the dirt. It was somewhere out there in the Arizona darkness, in a silver sedan, that had followed 6 Hells Angels bikers for 20 miles without fear of getting closer with every passing minute. Colt grabbed Sledge's arm. Boss, we need to move. Get Darla and the kids somewhere safe. Out of the state if we have to. Wire agreed. Running is smart. Head south, hit I-40B in Phoenix by midnight. Sledge looked at Darla. He did not speak. He waited. Because something in the way she stood, the way she held her daughter, the way her eyes had gone from frightened to focused to absolutely resolute, told him that the decision was not his to make. Darla looked at her daughter, then at the dark highway stretching in both directions, then at the 6 bikers standing around her like a wall of leather and chrome. No, she said. Colt blinked. What? We are not running. Darla's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The calm of a woman who has done the math in her head and arrived at a conclusion she does not like, but refuses to flinch from. If we run tonight, he follows. If we run tomorrow, he follows. If we run to Phoenix, he finds us in Phoenix. If we go to California, he finds us there. I have a daughter. She goes to school. She has friends. She has a life. I am not spending the rest of that life looking over my shoulder. She turned to Sledge. Her eyes were the eyes of the 20-year-old woman who had opened a motel door to a dying stranger and decided in the space of a single heartbeat that fear was not a good enough reason to let someone die. I faced 4 men who wanted to kill when I was 20 years old and alone in a room with nothing but hot water and old towels, she said. I did not run then. I am not running now. Sledge looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time that night, something that might have been admiration crossed his weathered face. Not the admiration of a man looking at someone who needs saving, the admiration of a man looking at an equal. What do you want to do? He said. Darla was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. When she spoke, every word was measured and precise. We go back to Red Mesa Diner. It is public. It has security cameras. Mr. Harlan knows me, knows Nola, and he will help. I know every inch of that building, every door, every window, every blind spot. Soren does not. He is coming to Flagstaff tonight. That message proves it. Let him come. Let him come to a place I choose on my terms with witnesses and cameras and people who will not look the other way. She paused. Then she looked at Sledge with something in her eyes that was not a request but an offer between equals. I do not need to be rescued. I need allies. Can you do that? Sledge held her gaze. Then he nodded once, slow and deep. The nod of a man who has just recognized something he has been looking for without knowing it. We can do that. The police arrived, 2 cruisers' lights spinning. The officers took one look at the bikers and tensed hands near holsters, but Wire stepped forward with raised palms and a calm, measured voice and walked them through it. Drunk man, iron bar, threatened a woman. Keys secured, no injuries. Everyone cooperative. The man called Pruitt because that was the name on the ID the officers pulled from his wallet said nothing. Not one word. He let them cuff him and put him in the back of the cruiser with the passive compliance of someone who knows that silence is the only card he has left to play. Darla watched the cruiser pull away. She watched until the taillights were gone and the road was dark again. Then she turned to the bikers and said something that no one expected. The money, she said. Sledge stopped in the act of putting on his helmet. What money? The checks. Every month for 9 years. The ones that came from a medical assistance fund that does not exist. The ones that paid for Nola's school clothes and her dentist appointments and the repair on our roof last winter. She looked at Sledge with eyes that were suddenly bright with tears she had been holding back all night. Not tears of fear, not tears of relief. Something deeper. Something that reached all the way down to the foundation of her life and shook it. I looked it up. I spent weeks trying to find that fund. The Southwestern Medical Workers Benevolence Association. There is no such organization. There never was. I thought it was a government program. I thought it was the hospital. I thought maybe my mother's old church had set something up before she passed. Her voice cracked. Just slightly, just enough to let the emotion through before she pulled it back under control. It was Raven, was it not? Sledge was silent for a long time. The wind blew across the highway and rattled the sagebrush and sent a tumbleweed rolling past them like a slow, silent witness. Then he spoke. Yeah, it was Raven. Darla's hand went to her mouth. After Vegas, Sledge continued. Raven never forgot what you did. He could not come to you directly. Too dangerous. He knew Soren was still out there, still holding grudges, and any direct contact between you and any Hell's Angel could put a target on your back. So he set up a fund, fake name, monthly deposits, routed through 3 different accounts, so it could never be traced back to him or to us. He looked at Nola, who was pressed against her mother's side, listening with the wide, absorbing eyes of a child who understands more than adults think. Raven has been sending money every month since your daughter was born. 9 years. He never missed a payment. Not once. Darla's legs buckled. Not dramatically. Not a collapse. Just a slight giving way at the knees, a settling, as if the ground beneath her had shifted by an inch, and she needed a moment to find her balance on the new surface. She sat down on the hood of her car. The metal was cold. The hazard lights were still blinking, casting her face in alternating shades of orange and shadow. Nola climbed up beside her, small hand finding her mother's hand and holding it tight. Darla cried. For the first time that entire night, through the terror of the broken-down car and the man with the iron bar and the revelation that she was being hunted by a ghost from 12 years ago, Darla Calloway cried. But these were not tears of fear. These were the tears of a woman who had spent 9 years believing she was alone, believing every dollar she stretched and every sacrifice she made was hers to carry by herself, and who had just discovered that someone had been standing beside her all along, invisible, silent, faithful, repaying a debt she had never asked to be repaid. She cried, and Nola held her hand, and 6 Hells Angels bikers stood in a loose circle on the shoulder of Highway 89A in the Arizona night, and said nothing because some moments do not need words. They need silence. They need the wind and the dark and the sound of a mother's gratitude breaking through the walls she built to survive. After a while, Darla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Sledge. Her voice was rough but whole. Then we owe it to Raven to end this tonight. Not just for me, for him, for everything he has done that I never knew about. Sledge nodded. We end it tonight. They moved. Darla drove her sedan engine, running rough but holding with Nola buckled tight in the passenger seat. The bikers reformed around her in escort formation. 3 ahead, 2 flanking, Sledge riding tail watching the darkness behind them for the silver sedan that he knew was still out there somewhere, circling back, regrouping, waiting for the next opportunity. On the drive back to Flagstaff, Darla made calls. Short, precise, wasting no words. First to Mr. Harlan, it is Darla. I need you to keep the diner open. Do not close, do not lock the doors. I will be there in 15 minutes and I will explain everything, but right now I need you to trust me. Mr. Harlan's voice came back, confused but willing. Darla, what the hell is going on? Someone from my past is coming to Flagstaff tonight. Someone dangerous. I need the diner as a meeting point. Public. Lit. Cameras rolling. Can you do that? A pause. Then, in the voice of a man who had known Darla Calloway for 3 years and had watched her work 2 jobs and raise a daughter alone and never once ask anyone for anything. Yeah, I can do that. Second call, to the Coconino County Dispatch. She did not dial 911. She dialed the non-emergency line and asked to speak with a specific officer, a woman named Sergeant Kowalski, whom Darla had treated in the emergency room 6 months ago for a dislocated shoulder. The conversation was brief. Darla explained the situation with the clinical precision of a nurse delivering a case history. The threats, the surveillance, the fake drunk on the highway, the text message on the man's phone. The name Deke Soren and his connection to a violent incident in Las Vegas in 2012. Sergeant Kowalski listened, asked 2 questions, then said she would have a unit within 3 minutes of the diner out of sight waiting for a call. Darla hung up and gripped the steering wheel. Nola watched her from the passenger seat. Mom, are we going back to the diner? Yes, baby. Is the scary man coming there? Darla looked at her daughter, 9 years old, big eyes, lopsided ponytail, the miniature helmet still sitting in her lap like a gift from another world. Maybe, Darla said. But if he does, he is walking into a room full of people who will not let anything happen to us. And he is walking into a room that I know better than he does. Nola was quiet for a moment. I asked my emotion. Then she said, Mom, you are being really brave. Darla almost smiled. I learned it from you, baby. You talked to 6 Hells Angels bikers tonight without blinking. Nola did smile. They are not so scary, Mom. Mr. Sledge even told me a story. Darla's hand found Nola's in the dark. She squeezed it once, held it, and did not let go for the rest of the drive. Red Mesa Diner looked different at night. The neon sign buzzed louder in the darkness, its pink and blue glow casting a warm circle of light around the entrance. The parking lot was empty except for Mr. Harlan's truck and a single car belonging to a customer who had apparently decided that watching the rest of this story unfold was worth staying for. Mr. Harlan met them at the door. His face was a mixture of worry and determination, the face of a small-town man who had spent his whole life avoiding trouble and had just decided for the first time to walk toward it. Darla stepped inside and immediately began moving. Not panicking, working. She walked the room the way a general walks a battlefield, before the engagement, noting sightlines, cover positions, blind spots. Wire, she said, pointing to the corner booth that had a clear view of both the front door and the side entrance. You sit there, phone out, camera recording. If anyone comes through either door, you get their face. Wire nodded and moved. Mr. Harlan, the security camera above the register. Is it recording? Always, he said. Good. Make sure the tape does not get erased tonight. Whatever happens, that footage is evidence. She turned to Sledge and Flint. You and the others park your bikes behind the building, out of sight from the road. If Soren drives past and sees 6 Harleys in the lot, he will not stop. He needs to think I am alone, or close to alone. Sledge studied her for a moment. Then he said to Flint, You heard her. The bikers moved. Engines rumbled to life and rolled around to the back of the diner out of view. Colt took a position by the kitchen door. Flint posted near the back exit. 2 others spread out in Harlan's truck and Wire's bike, positioned where they could see the parking lot without being seen. Darla sat down at her daughter's usual table, the one by the window, the one where Nola had been drawing a winged horse just 2 hours ago in a world that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. She placed her hands flat on the table. Steady, still. Nola sat across from her. Between them, the old sketchbook was still open to the half-finished drawing. Nola looked at it, then at her mother. Mom, what if he does not come? Darla looked at the neon light reflecting in the window at the dark parking lot beyond, at the empty highway stretching into the desert night. Then we go home, she said, and we sleep. And tomorrow we wake up and go to school and go to work and we live our lives. Because that is what brave people do. They live. She reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind Nola's ear. But if he does come, she said quietly, he is walking into my house. And in my house, I make the rules. Outside, the desert wind blew. Inside, Red Mesa Diner waited. The ceiling fan turned in its slow, lazy circles. The radio played low. Mr. Harlan polished the counter. Wire's phone recorded. And somewhere in the kitchen doorway, invisible but present, Colt stood with his hand resting on his belt, watching the front door with the patience of a man who has all night and nowhere else to be. Darla closed her eyes for one moment. Just one. She thought of a motel room in Las Vegas. A dying man on her floor, the sound of fists on doors getting closer. The choice she made then, 12 years ago, to open that door and let a stranger's blood stain her only towels. She had not known that choice would follow her here, to this diner, to this night, to this moment where everything she had built, her daughter, her work, her quiet life, rested on whether she could face the consequence of her own courage one more time. She opened her eyes. She was ready. 11 minutes past 11 on a Tuesday night in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Red Mesa Diner sat in its pool of neon light like a ship anchored in a dark ocean. The pink and blue glow of the sign hummed against the silence of the desert, and inside the small cinder block building, the ceiling fan turned in its endless slow circles, pushing air that smelled like old coffee and the ghost of the day's last pie. The radio had been turned down to a whisper. Merle Haggard was gone, replaced by something softer, a steel guitar instrumental that drifted through the room like smoke. Mr. Harlan stood behind the counter, polishing the same glass he had been polishing for 10 minutes, his eyes moving between the front door and Darla Calloway with the nervous regularity of a man watching a fuse burn towards something he cannot stop. Darla sat at the window table, Nola's table. Her hands were flat on the surface, fingers spread perfectly still. She had not moved in several minutes. Her breathing was slow and even, the breathing of a woman who has decided that panic is a luxury she cannot afford and has locked it away in a room she will not open tonight. Nola sat across from her. The sketchbook was closed now, pushed to the side. The child's hands were in her lap, and her eyes moved between her mother's face and the dark window, with the quiet alertness of a young animal that senses a change in the weather, but does not yet know what kind of storm is coming. In the corner booth, Wire sat with his phone propped against the salt shaker camera, recording the lens aimed at the front door. His face was impassive. His body was still. Only his eyes moved, tracking the parking lot through the window with the mechanical precision of a surveillance system. Somewhere behind the kitchen door, invisible but present, Colt stood with his back against the wall and his hand resting near his belt. His curly hair was tied tight, and his jaw was set in the hard line of a young man who has been told to wait and is not good at waiting, but will do it because the order came from Sledge. Outside in the darkness behind the building, 4 Harley-Davidsons sat cooling in the night air. Flint leaned against the cinder block wall near the back exit, his silver beard catching the faint light from the kitchen window. 2 other bikers were positioned in Mr. Harlan's truck and on Wire's bike, watching the road from angles that covered both approaches. And Sledge was somewhere in the dark. Nola did not know exactly where. None of them did except maybe Flint, who had ridden with Sledge for 30 years and could feel his presence the way old sailors feel, a change in the tide. The diner was a trap, not the violent kind, not the kind with weapons and ambush positions and escape routes planned for when things go wrong. It was something more elegant than that. It was a stage, lit, public watched, recorded. A place where a man could walk in and say things he should not say, and every word would be captured, every gesture documented, every threat preserved in the digital memory of Wire's phone, and the security camera above the register, and the eyes of witnesses who would remember this night for the rest of their lives. Darla had built this, not with guns or muscle or the brute leverage of 6 bikers, though those things were there if needed. She had built it with the same quiet intelligence she had used 12 years ago in a motel room in Las Vegas. The intelligence of a woman who understands that the most powerful weapon in a confrontation is not force but information, not violence but visibility. Make him visible. Make him speak. Let the truth do the rest. At 11:14, headlights appeared on the road. Nola saw them first. A distant glow, 2 points of pale yellow moving slowly along the highway from the south. Not fast, not aggressive, moving with the unhurried deliberation of someone who knows exactly where they are going and is in no rush to get there. The headlights turned into the parking lot. The car that pulled in was not the silver sedan that had tailed them earlier. It was a black SUV, newer, cleaner, with tinted windows and plates that Darla could not read from inside the diner. It parked in the center of the lot directly under the neon sign and sat there for a full minute with the engine running. Mr. Harlan's hands stopped on the glass. His knuckles whitened. Darla did not move. She watched the SUV the way she watched a patient's vital signs when something was about to change. Calm attention, no assumption, just observation. The engine died. 3 doors open. The man who stepped out of the driver's side was not what the diner customers would have expected. He was not large, not obviously threatening. He was average height, lean, with a clean-shaved face and gray hair combed neatly to one side. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, and his shoes were polished. And if you saw him on the street, you might take him for a retired accountant or a small-town banker or someone's respectable uncle visiting from out of state. But his eyes were wrong. They were pale, almost colorless, and they moved with a quicksilver efficiency that cataloged everything they touched. The parking lot, the neon sign, the windows of the diner, the number of cars, the visibility from the road, the exits. Those were the eyes of a man who entered every room as if he might need to leave it in a hurry or ensure that someone else could not. His name was Deke Soren. 2 men followed him. Younger, bigger, with the blunt-featured anonymity of men who are paid to stand behind someone and look uncomfortable. They wore dark jackets that were slightly too large, and their hands hung at their sides with the studied casualness of people who are accustomed to carrying things in those hands that they would rather not show. The 3 of them walked to the front door. Soren opened it himself. He held it for his men the way a host holds a door for dinner guests, and the small courtesy of that gesture was somehow more unsettling than any display of aggression could have been. Cold air rushed in. The bell above the door jingled, a bright, cheerful sound that was grotesquely out of place. Soren's pale eyes found Darla immediately, not with surprise, with confirmation. The way you look at a chess piece that has moved to exactly the square you predicted. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. It sat on his mouth like something placed there by hand, a careful arrangement of muscles designed to project civility, while the machinery behind it calculated something else entirely. He walked to Darla's table. His men followed 2 steps behind, flanking him like bookends. One of them glanced at Wire in the corner booth, noted the phone, and filed the information away behind an expressionless face. Soren pulled out the chair across from Darla, the chair where Nola usually sat. But Nola had moved. She was beside her mother now, pressed against Darla's side, her small hand gripping her mother's arm. Soren sat down. He placed his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, mirroring the posture Darla had been holding for the last half hour. The symmetry was deliberate. Everything about this man was deliberate. "Miss Calloway," he said. His voice was soft, measured. The voice of a man who has learned that volume by unnecessary when you have leverage. It has been a very long time. Darla looked at him. Her face gave nothing away. She had spent the last hour preparing for this moment, of rehearsing it in her mind, mapping every possible direction the conversation could take, and planning her responses for each one. She was not going to be surprised. She was not going to be afraid. She was going to let him talk. "I do not believe we have met," she said. Her voice was steady as stone. Soren tilted his head, a practiced gesture of mild amusement. "No, not directly. But I know you, Darla. I have known about you for 12 years. The young woman in the motel room. The one who found something on her doorstep that she should have left outside." His pale eyes moved to Nola. The girl pressed closer to her mother. Soren's gaze rested on the child for exactly 2 seconds, then returned to Darla. "And now there is a child. Life goes on, families grow, people build things they would very much like to keep." The threat was so smooth, so perfectly embedded in ordinary words that a stranger listening might have heard nothing but polite conversation. But Darla heard it. She heard every razor hidden in every syllable, and she let it land, let it sit in the air between them. Let the silence stretch just long enough for Wire's camera to capture the pause, the implication, the carefully constructed menace. Then she spoke. "What do you want, Mr. Soren?" The name hit him. Not hard, just a flicker in those pale eyes, a momentary tightening at the corners, the recognition that she knew who he was and had chosen to say it aloud. In a room with a security camera, in front of witnesses, Soren recovered in less than a second. But the second was enough. "I want to resolve an old matter," he said, quietly, without complications. "You have something that belongs to me. A memory, a piece of information that has kept me uncomfortable for a very long time." He leaned forward slightly. "You saw things in that motel room that could cause me considerable difficulty, even after all these years. Certain statutes do not expire, Darla. Certain witnesses become more dangerous with time, not less." Darla held his gaze. She did not blink. She did not shift. She sat in that chair with her daughter pressed against her side and let the man who had ordered the near murder of Raven sit 3 feet away from her and threaten her with the calm conversational tone of someone discussing a property dispute. And she let him keep talking because every word he spoke was being recorded, every implication, every veiled threat, every admission that he knew what had happened in that motel room 12 years ago and that his presence here tonight was connected to it. "I am a reasonable man," Soren continued. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness that was as false as his smile. "I do not want unpleasantness. I never have. What happened in Las Vegas was a business matter that got out of hand. People were hurt who should not have been hurt. I regret that." He paused. The pause was theatrical, timed, but regret does not erase risk. And you, Miss Calloway, are a risk I can no longer afford to leave unaddressed. One of his men shifted his weight, a subtle movement barely perceptible, but it changed the geometry of the room. The man was now positioned between Wire's corner booth and the front door, blocking the sightline, crowding the space. Mr. Harlan gripped the counter. His face was gray. Darla felt Nola trembling against her side. She placed her hand over her daughter's hand and squeezed once. A signal, an anchor. Then she did something that Soren did not expect. She leaned back in her chair, not forward, not into the confrontation. Back, away from it, creating space, projecting the one thing that a man like Soren could not calculate for because it did not exist in his vocabulary. "Calm, Mr. Soren," she said. Her voice carried across the diner with a clarity that made Mr. Harlan look up and Wire adjust his phone angle. "You drove 400 miles to sit in a diner in Flagstaff and tell me that you are uncomfortable. That is a long drive for discomfort." Soren's smile flickered. "Let me tell you what I think," Darla continued. "I think you sent a man to hold me on that highway tonight. I think you have been watching my house for 3 weeks. I think you tracked my schedule at the hospital. And I think you are sitting here right now because you believe that a single mother working 2 jobs in a small town has no one to turn to and nowhere to go." She leaned forward now. Just slightly, just enough. "But you are wrong about that," Soren's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the practiced composure cracked by a fraction, not enough for a casual observer to notice, But Darla was not a casual observer. She was a woman who read vital signs for a living, who could detect a 1-degree change in a patient's temperature from across a room, and she saw the crack the way a geologist sees a fault line. Something in the room had shifted. Soren felt it before he understood it. His man nearest the door felt it too. He turned his head, slightly scanning the room with new urgency. The kitchen door, the back hallway, the corner booth where Wire sat with his phone aimed and recording. "What did you do?" Soren said. The softness was leaving his voice. The civility was peeling away like paint in the rain, revealing something harder and colder underneath. And that was when Nola moved. She did not plan it. There was no signal from Darla, no instruction, no choreography. She simply felt the moment the way children sometimes feel things, with an instinct that bypasses logic and goes straight to the heart of what matters. She slipped off the chair. Her small feet hit the tile floor without sound. She walked around the table past her mother's reaching hand, past the edge of Soren's careful geometry, and stood directly in front of the man who had come to threaten everything she loved. She was holding something. The sketchbook, open to a page she had drawn earlier that evening while the bikers told her the story of her mother and Raven. A drawing in colored pencil on cheap paper done in the unsteady but earnest hand of a 9-year-old artist. It showed a big man in a leather jacket with a gray beard and stern but kind eyes. Beside him stood a huge motorcycle with chrome pipes and wide handlebars. And above his head, drawn in yellow and white crayon, were small wings of light. Not biker wings, angel wings. The way a child imagines protection. Nola held the drawing up. Soren looked down at her. His pale eyes, which had been calculating and controlled, went blank for a moment. The blankness of a system encountering an input it was not designed to process. Nola spoke. Her voice was small but clear, the way a single note played on a piano can fill an entire hall. "Are you the bad man who wants to hurt my mom?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward. Mr. Harlan gripped the counter. Wire's hand steadied the phone. Soren's man by the door took a half step and then stopped, frozen by the absurdity and the power of a child standing in front of his boss with a crayon drawing and a question that stripped away every layer of pretense in the room. Nola continued. Her eyes were wet but unblinking. "My mom saved a man. She saved his life. She hid him and took care of him when he was hurt. Mom did not do anything wrong. She is a good person. She is the best person I know." Soren stared at the child, his mouth opened slightly. No words came out. For a man who had built his entire life on control and the careful management of information and intimidation, and the precise application of pressure at the right moments, the sudden presence of a 9-year-old girl holding a crayon drawing and asking him point blank if he was a bad man, was a catastrophic failure of the script. He lost 1 second. Just one. His eyes broke from Darla, from Wire, from the careful surveillance of the room, and focused entirely on the impossible thing in front of him. That second was enough. The kitchen door opened. Colt came through first, fast and silent, moving to cover the space between Soren's man and the front door. Behind him, the back exit opened, and Flint stepped in from the darkness, his silver beard catching the neon light, his deep-set eyes locked on the second of Soren's men, with the patient focus of a wolf that has been waiting a very long time to close a distance. And then Sledge. He did not come through a door. He came from the hallway that led to the restrooms, a hallway that Soren's men had not thought to check because it led nowhere except to 2 small rooms and a mop closet. Sledge had been standing in that hallway for 20 minutes, listening to every word, breathing quietly in the dark, waiting for Darla's plan to unfold exactly as she had designed it. He stepped into the light. All 6'3" of him, leather jacket, patches. The skull tattoo on his left arm exposed where he had rolled his sleeve. Steel blue eyes that caught the overhead fluorescent and held it like ice holds sunlight. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence spoke. It filled the room the way water fills a vessel, finding every corner, pressing against every wall, leaving no space unoccupied. Behind him, the other 2 bikers entered from the back. 6 Hell's Angels, positioned at every exit, every angle. Every line of retreat that Soren might have calculated was now closed. Soren's men reacted. One reached inside his jacket. Colt was faster, not with violence, with proximity. He stepped so close to the man that any movement of the arm would have meant contact. And he looked into the man's eyes with the flat, unflinching stare of someone who has been in this exact situation before and knows exactly how it ends. The man's hand came back out. Empty. Soren looked around the room, left, right, behind. The mathematics of his situation resolved with brutal clarity. 6 bikers, a recording phone, a security camera, a diner owner who was reaching for the telephone behind the counter, a woman who had orchestrated all of it, and a 9-year-old girl standing in front of him with a drawing that made him look like exactly what he was. He turned back to Darla. The mask was gone. The civility, the soft voice, the reasonable man act, all of it stripped away, and beneath it was the face of a man who had spent his entire adult life making other people afraid, and who was now experiencing, perhaps for the first time, the sensation of having no move left to play. Darla stood up. She placed her hand on Nola's shoulder, gently guiding her daughter behind her, and then she stepped forward until she was standing directly in front of Deke Soren, close enough to see the pale emptiness of his eyes, close enough to smell the leather of his expensive jacket and the sharp chemical scent of the cologne he wore to cover whatever he truly smelled like underneath. She spoke quietly, not for the room, for him. 12 years ago, I opened a door and chose not to be afraid. I was 20 years old. I had nothing. No money, no protection, no one who would have noticed if I disappeared. And 4 of your men stood outside that door looking for a man I had hidden under my bed. And I looked them in the eyes and said 2 words. She paused. Let the memory settle between them like a weight placed on a scale. I am not 20 anymore, Mr. Soren. I have a daughter. I have a life. I have a community that knows my name. And tonight I have 6 men standing in this room who owe me a debt they have been waiting 12 years to repay. She reached into her back pocket and placed Wire's phone on the table in front of Soren. The screen showed the recording timer. 37 minutes, every word he had spoken since walking through that door. This is your face, your voice, your admission that you know what happened in that motel, your threat against me and my daughter. Recorded, backed up, ready to go wherever it needs to go. Soren's jaw tightened. The police, Darla said, are already on their way. I called them before you arrived. They know your name. They know about Las Vegas. They know about the man you sent to hold me on that highway tonight, and they will have his testimony by morning. She stepped back, not in retreat, in completion, the way a craftsman steps back from a finished piece. You walked into my house tonight, she said. In my house, I make the rules. Soren did not move. For several long seconds, he sat in the chair at the window table in Red Mesa Diner and stared at the woman in front of him with an expression that held nothing. No anger, no calculation, no plan, just the emptiness of a man whose every option has been closed. Then he stood, slowly, his hands at his sides. He looked at Sledge, who stood 3 paces away with his arms crossed and his pale eyes burning quiet and steady. Soren said nothing. He turned toward the door. Red and blue lights were already visible through the window. 2 cruisers pulling into the parking lot, moving fast, kicking up gravel. Sergeant Kowalski stepped out of the lead car before it had fully stopped, hand on her belt, eyes scanning the diner entrance. Soren's men were the first to be taken. They went without resistance, arms extended, faces blank, with the practiced compliance of men who understood that tonight was a loss and that silence was the only strategy left. The officers cuffed them by the SUV, read them their rights in flat professional voices, and put them in separate cruisers. A 3rd cruiser arrived minutes later, and the officer inside reported to Sergeant Kowalski that they had pulled over a silver sedan 2 miles south on 89A. The driver, a thin man with no identification and a prepaid phone full of deleted messages, had been circling the area for hours. Soren's advanced scout. The shadow that had followed 6 Harleys through the desert was now sitting in the back of a patrol car, and the last loose thread of the night was tied. Soren was last. He walked out of the diner under his own power, flanked by 2 officers but not yet touched. At the door he stopped, turned, looked back at Darla one final time. She met his gaze, held it, did not flinch, did not blink, did not look away. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him turn back toward the parking lot without a word. The officers guided him to the cruiser. The door closed. The engine started. The lights spun in their slow, hypnotic circles, and then the parking lot was quiet. Mr. Harlan exhaled so hard, his whole body deflated behind the counter. Lord Almighty, he said. Lord Almighty. Wire stopped the recording and pocketed his phone. His hands were trembling. Not much, just enough. Colt leaned against the wall by the kitchen door and closed his eyes. Flint stood at the back exit and ran both hands through his silver beard, a gesture that seemed to drain the last of the tension from his massive frame. Sledge had not moved. He stood in the center of the diner arms, still crossed eyes on the parking lot, where the cruiser's taillights were shrinking into the distance. He watched until they were gone. Then he turned and looked at Darla. She was holding Nola. The girl had her face buried in her mother's shirt, and her small body was shaking with the silent, heaving sobs of a child who has been brave for as long as she can and has finally reached the end of her capacity. Darla held her the way she always held her, tight, complete, as if nothing else in the world existed or mattered or ever could. Darla, Sledge said. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. Her face was drawn with exhaustion. But behind the tiredness and the tears, there was something else. Something that looked like iron. You did that, Sledge said. Not us, you. Darla shook her head. We did it together. Sledge almost smiled. The almost was important. It was as close as he got. Yeah, he said. Together. The diner settled into a new kind of quiet, not the tense electric silence of before. Something softer, something that felt like the air after a thunderstorm, when the rain has stopped and the wind is dead and the world smells clean and new and grateful to still be standing. Mr. Harlan brought coffee. He did not ask if anyone wanted it. He just brought it. Cups for the bikers, hot milk for Nola, a glass of water for Darla. He set them down on the counter and stepped back and stood there with his hands folded over his apron, looking at the people in his diner with an expression that mixed bewilderment and admiration in equal measure. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. The kind of time that does not count, itself that simply exists between one thing ending and another beginning. And then from outside came a sound, a single engine, not the collective thunder of the pack. One motorcycle, coming from the south. The sound grew steadily, a deep, rolling baritone that was different from the Harleys parked behind the building. Older, rougher, the voice of a machine that had been ridden hard for a very long time and had earned every scar on its body. Sledge heard it first. His head turned toward the window and something changed in his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the confirmation of something he had set in motion hours ago and had been waiting to see arrive. He said one word. Here. Flint straightened from the wall. Colt opened his eyes. Wire pocketed his phone and stood. Outside, a single headlight swept across the parking lot. The motorcycle that pulled in was a Harley but older than the others, a vintage softail with a weathered black tank and chrome that had been polished so many times the plating was thin enough to show the brass underneath. It was covered in road dust. Not Arizona dust, different dust. The kind that comes from crossing state lines, from riding through the night without stopping, from covering distance as fast as metal and fuel and inhuman endurance will allow. The rider killed the engine. The silence that followed was enormous. He dismounted slowly. He was not as tall as Sledge, not as broad as Flint. He was lean, wiry, with the ropey musculature of a man who has spent his life doing physical work that never ends. His hair was dark shot through with gray at the temples, and he wore it long enough to touch his collar. His face was weathered in the way that desert faces are weathered by sun and wind and time, and the kind of experience that leaves marks deeper than wrinkles. He wore a leather jacket, old, broken in. The patches on it were faded but legible, and on his left arm, visible where his sleeve rode up as he removed his helmet, was a tattoo, a skull wearing a helmet, sharp wings spread wide, every line deep and dark. And on the right wing, so small, you would miss it if you were not looking for it, a tiny chip where the line deviated from its path. A flaw, an imperfection, a sneeze preserved in ink from 12 years ago. He walked to the diner door, opened it, stepped inside, and stopped. Because Darla Calloway was standing 10 feet away from him, and she was looking at him, and on her left wrist, visible where the sleeve of her jacket had been pushed up during the long hours of this impossible night, was the same tattoo, smaller, faded, but identical, down to the chip on the right wing. The man and the woman looked at each other across the small diner in Flagstaff, Arizona, and 12 years collapsed between them like a bridge falling into a river, leaving nothing but the two banks and the empty space where the time used to be. His name was Raven. He did not speak right away. He stood in the doorway with his helmet in his hand and his road-worn face holding an expression that was too complex for any single word. Gratitude, grief, relief, shame at having stayed away so long, joy at being here now. All of it mixed together in a human face that could not contain it all, but tried anyway. Darla's hand went to her mouth. She had not seen this man in the 12 years. She had last seen him standing in the doorway of a cheap motel room in Las Vegas, his ribs taped his shoulder in a makeshift sling, his face battered and swollen but alive. Alive because of her. He had turned back to look at her one last time before walking away into the Nevada sun, and the last thing he had said was, "I will not forget." He had not forgotten. Raven took 3 steps into the diner. His boots were quiet on the tile, not the heavy thud of the other bikers. A softer sound, the sound of a man approaching something he considers sacred. He stopped in front of Darla, close enough to see the years on her face, close enough to see the small tattoo on her wrist, close enough to see the 9-year-old girl pressed against her side looking up at him with wet eyes. Raven looked at Darla. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. When the words came, they were simple, stripped of everything except what mattered. "You gave me 3 days," he said. His voice was rough. Not from the road, from the weight of what he was saying. 3 days in that room. You stopped my bleeding. You hid me. You stood at that door and lied to men who would have killed you if they knew the truth. You gave me 3 days, and those 3 days gave me 12 years. He paused. His jaw worked beneath the stubble on his face. "I owe you my whole life, Darla, and I have never once been able to say that to your face." Darla could not speak. The tears she had been holding came all at once, not in a flood, but in a quiet, steady stream that ran down her cheeks and fell onto the hand that Nola was gripping at her side. She stood there in the neon light of Red Mesa Diner at nearly midnight on a Tuesday in Arizona and cried without sound, without shame, without apology, because some debts are too heavy for words and some gratitudes are too deep for anything but tears. Nola looked up at Raven. She looked at his face, his jacket, the tattoo on his arm. She looked at the chip on the right wing. She looked at her mother's wrist. And in that moment, the 9-year-old girl understood the full circle, the complete shape of the story she had been inside all evening without seeing its edges. Her mother had saved this man. This man had saved her mother back quietly and visibly for 9 years. And tonight, the people this man belonged to had ridden through the desert to stand between Nola and her mother, and the man who wanted to erase what happened in that motel room. The circle was closed, every line connected, every debt acknowledged, every wing chipped or hole accounted for. Raven looked at Nola. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. His weathered face softened in a way that made him look 10 years younger. "You must be Nola," he said. Nola nodded. She was crying, but she was also smiling because children can do both things at once in a way that adults have forgotten. "Your mom is the bravest person I have ever known," Raven said. "And from what I hear, you might be just like her." Darla put her hand on Raven's shoulder. The gesture was natural, unplanned. The way you touch someone you saved when you see them standing and whole and alive after all the years of wondering. "You sent the money," she said. Raven nodded. "Every month. I thought I was alone." He looked up at her. "You were never alone, not for one day." The diner was silent, not with tension, with reverence. The kind of silence that falls over a room when something true and fragile and impossibly beautiful has just been spoken aloud, and everyone present knows they are witnessing something they do not deserve to see, but are grateful to see anyway. Sledge broke the silence the way he did everything, simply. "Time to get them home," he said. The bikers moved. Engines were started. Helmets were donned. Formation was discussed in quick, low words and settled with nods. 7 bikes now, instead of 6. Raven rode at the rear behind Sledge, his vintage softail, adding its deeper, rougher note to the collective thunder. Darla drove her sedan. Nola sat beside her, buckled in the oversized helmet in her lap, her hand resting on it the way you rest your hand on something precious. The taillights disappeared. Then he went inside, sat down on his stool behind the counter, and put his head in his hands, and he sat like that for a very long time. The convoy entered Flagstaff's residential streets just before midnight. The Harley engines, 7 of them, now rumbled through the quiet neighborhood with a sound that no one within 3 blocks could sleep through or ignore. Porch lights came on. Front doors opened. People in robes and pajamas stepped out onto their lawns and their stoops and their driveways and stared. Because what they saw was this: 7 Hells Angels motorcycles in perfect formation, headlights, blazing engines rolling like controlled thunder escorting a battered blue sedan through the middle of their quiet street. Not speeding, not showing off. Moving with the slow, deliberate dignity of a funeral procession, except that what they were honoring was not death, but something harder to name. A woman in her bathrobe stood frozen on her front steps. "That is Darla's car," she said. "What on earth?" An old man watering his lawn at midnight, because old men do things like that, stood with the hose running over his shoes and his mouth hanging open. The bikers did not veer off. They did not scatter. They rode all the way to Darla's small house at the end of the street, and there they stopped, and 7 bikes lined up along the curb in a row so neat it looked rehearsed. 7 engines died in sequence. 7 headlights snapped onto full beam, flooding the street, in the yard, in the front of the house with white lights so bright it turned midnight into noon. A neighbor across the street gasped, "Lord have mercy! What is happening?" Darla stepped out of the car. Nola climbed out the other side. Mother and daughter stood in the driveway, bathed in the light of 7 Harley Davidsons, and the neighborhood held its collective breath. Sledge dismounted. He removed his helmet. He walked to Nola. He did not kneel. He lowered himself. The way a tall man lowers himself when he wants to look a child in the eyes without making her look up. One knee on the ground, both hands on his thighs, his steel blue eyes level with hers. "Nola," he said. She looked at him. Her face was streaked with dried tears and road dust, and the kind of exhaustion that only comes from living through something enormous. But her eyes were clear. "Listen close," Sledge said. "From now on, if anyone at all gives you trouble." He paused, made sure she was hearing every word. "You just say this: 'My mom once saved the angels.' That is enough." The nearest neighbor, the woman in the bathrobe, covered her mouth with both hands. Her husband came up behind her and put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there on their porch and did not move. Nola was still for a moment. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Sledge's neck. He stiffened. A barely perceptible tension in his shoulders, the involuntary response of a man who has not been hugged by a child in decades and has forgotten what it feels like. Then slowly his hand came up and rested on her back. Light, careful. The hand of a man holding something more valuable than anything he has ever carried. He released her with a gentleness that did not match his size. Then he reached into his jacket and produced something small. A miniature helmet barely larger than his fist, red and black with small white wings painted on either side. The paint was not professional. It was hand-done with the slightly uneven strokes of someone working with care rather than skill. "This is for you," he said. Nola took it with both hands. Her eyes were enormous. She held it up to the headlights, and the little white wings caught the light and seemed to glow. "So you remember," Sledge said. "Someone is always watching. Someone is always protecting you." Darla stepped forward. She was crying again, but these tears were different from all the others. These were the tears that come at the end of something. The tears that wash away the last of the fear and leave behind only what matters. "I do not know how to thank you enough," she said. "So many years, I did not think anyone remembered." Sledge looked at her. His pale eyes held something warm, something that had been building all night and had finally found its shape. "We never forget, Darla. Never." Raven stood beside his bike. He had not approached. He had watched the whole scene from his position at the curb, hands in his jacket pockets, face half in shadow and half in the headlight glow. Darla looked at him across the distance. He looked back, and between them passed something that did not need to be spoken because it had been spoken 12 years ago in a motel room in Las Vegas and had been echoing back and forth across the desert ever since. Sledge put on his helmet. He chin-nodded to Colt, then Flint, then Wire, then the others, then Raven. "Let us ride," he said. 7 engines fired in sequence. The sound built and built until it filled the street and the yards and the houses and the sky above them. A neighbor shielded his face from the wind. Others just stood and watched with the stunned, helpless expressions of people witnessing something they know they will tell their grandchildren about. The bikes turned. 7 machines moving in perfect synchronization, headlights sweeping the road in a wide arc. They accelerated slowly, deliberately, the way a storm withdraws when it has finished its work. One by one they passed under the street lights and into the darkness at the end of the road. Sledge was last. He glanced back. One look, 1 second. Long enough to see Darla and Nola standing on the front lawn, the old patch scarf in Darla's hand, the miniature helmet in Nola's, the two of them holding each other in the fading glow. He nodded, slow, deep. Then the Hells Angels disappeared into the Flagstaff night, and the sound of their engines faded like the last note of a song that has been playing for 12 years and has finally reached its resolution. Low, strong, free, loyal, grateful. Inside the house, Darla turned on the living room light. Warm yellow glow covered the familiar furniture, the worn rug, the photographs on the mantel, all the small, ordinary things that make a house a home and that had almost been taken from them tonight. Nola sat beside her mother on the sofa. She lifted Darla's left wrist gently and looked at the tattoo. The skull, the wings, the little chip on the right side where the needle had jumped 12 years ago because a man sneezed. "Mom," she whispered, "I am not scared of this tattoo anymore." Darla smiled. The smile was tired and tender and held the weight of everything that had happened and everything that would come after. "Really?" Nola nodded. Her eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "I feel proud, because it is the tattoo that good people gave you." Darla could not speak. She pulled her daughter close and held her, and the two of them sat like that for a long time in the warm light, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. After a while, Nola slid off the sofa and went to her room. She came back with a pink diary with a cat on the cover. She opened it to a new page and picked up a pencil and wrote in her careful, uneven 9-year-old script. "My mom once saved the Iron Angels." Darla read the words over her daughter's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. Her shoulders trembled, not from pain, from a pride so deep it felt like it would crack her open. Nola picked up her colored pencils and sat on the floor. She opened the sketchbook to a fresh page and began to draw. Darla leaned close to watch. Under the warm light, a picture appeared on the paper. A big man in a leather jacket with a gray beard and stern but kind eyes. Beside him, a massive Harley-Davidson with chrome pipes that gleamed. And above his head, drawn in yellow and white crayon, small wings of light. "This is Mr. Sledge," Nola said softly. "I think he is like a superhero." Darla laughed through her tears. "Yeah, baby, I think so too." Nola colored every line with the focused intensity of a child who knows she is making the most important drawing of her life. When she was finished, she held it up and studied it critically. "Mom, do you think Mr. Sledge would like this picture?" Darla stroked her daughter's hair. "If he saw it, he would be so proud." Outside, the desert wind blew gently against the windows. The cold night air of Flagstaff carried the scent of pine from the peaks and sage from the flats and the distant mineral smell of red earth cooling under stars. Darla gathered her daughter in her arms. They sat together on the rug in the warm light, surrounded by the drawings and the diary and the miniature helmet and the patch scarf and all the evidence of a night that had changed them both in ways they would spend years understanding. "Thank you, Mom," Nola whispered, "for saving Uncle Raven. If you had not helped him, who would have helped us tonight?" Darla held her tighter. Her tears fell into her daughter's hair. "I just did what I thought was right," she said. "And tonight they did right by us." Near midnight, Nola climbed into bed. She pulled the covers to her chin and placed the miniature helmet on the pillow beside her, its little white wings catching the moonlight that slipped through the gap in the curtains. Darla tucked her in, smoothed the blanket, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Mom," Nola called softly. "Yes, baby. I think from now on, I will not be scared of the dark anymore." Darla cupped her daughter's cheek. Her hand was warm. Her eyes were gentle. "Why not love?" "Because I know that somewhere out there, someone is always protecting me." Darla smiled, a smile that held every fear she had ever carried and every hope she had ever sheltered and every act of courage she had ever performed, from a motel room in Las Vegas to a diner in Flagstaff to the small bedroom where her daughter lay safe and warm and brave. She turned off the bedside lamp. Moonlight filled the room, soft and silver painting gentle shapes on the wall. Nola lay still, listening to the wind outside, feeling the peace of the small room settle around her like a blanket. And then from very far away, carried on the night wind across the desert and through the streets and over the rooftops of Flagstaff, came a sound. A low Harley engine rumble, distant and fading. The last echo of 7 motorcycles riding into the darkness, carrying their debts and their loyalties and their fierce, imperfect love into whatever road came next. Nola smiled. She closed her eyes. She wrapped her small hand around the miniature helmet and held it close to her chest, its little white wings pressed against her heart. "Good night, Iron Angel," she whispered. And that was the night Nola Calloway understood that this enormous, dangerous, beautiful world is still full of people who keep their promises. The night she learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that someone else's life is worth more than your own comfort. The night she discovered that her mother, the tired woman who worked 2 jobs and hummed off key and fell asleep in her clothes, was the bravest person who had ever lived. And the night she knew with the unshakable certainty that only a child can feel that she would never truly be alone.